Good afternoon and good evening. Thank you for joining us from all across the globe to learn about unlocking finance for climate action and the role of the private sector in the context of green recovery. My name is Ilen Meirovich, and I am the head of climate change at IDB Invest, the private sector institution of the IDB Group. I am delighted to start this conversation with all of you today. As the last 18 months have shown us a new way of connecting, this event is no different. In the sidelines of COP26, this event is also hybrid. First, from Washington, D.C., I will share with you how IDB Invest is working in Latin America and the Caribbean to support the region for a sustainable and inclusive recovery. And I will pass on the word to James Scriven, our CEO in Glasgow, where COP26 is taking place. We are delighted to have distinguished panelists today to provide us with their perspectives on how we can mobilize more resources for climate action. First, we welcome Mafalda Duarte, the head of the Climate Investment Funds, one of the main global funds in the climate finance architecture. Second, Laurie Kerr, the CEO of FinDev, Canada's development finance institution, and a partner with which we have provided financing to private clients in the region. Third, we have Raj Shah, president of the Rockefeller Foundation, with whom we are entering a key partnership to support energy access and energy transition in LAC. And finally, we have Scott Mather, the CIO of the U.S. Core and Sustainable Investment at PIMCO, one of the global investment management firms with a focus on sustainable investment. What brings us here today is our region, Latin America and the Caribbean, and one of the most vulnerable regions to the impacts of climate change. But it's also the most diverse region in the world, and an important natural asset to all. We have estimated that unless we restrict to less than 2 degrees Celsius the climate change, our region will suffer damages for climate impacts that could reach $100 billion annually by 2050. The post-pandemic world offers a unique opportunity to rebuild in a sustainable and inclusive way. We must actively keep working with public, private sector, and civil society to co-create and scale up sustainable solutions and mobilize resources to make those solutions a reality. IDB Invest works with the private sector to ensure climate action and raise ambition, which is at the core of our Vision 2025, Reinvest in the Americas. And since COP25, we have redoubled our efforts to innovate and mobilize resources from private capital, and a work that has resulted in 2020 in providing $1.9 billion from our own capital, mobilized $1.8 billion in core mobilization, with an additional catalytic mobilization of $2.3 billion for climate investments. And we are committed to continue to do so, following a triple strategy. First, promoting a sustainable financial sector by working with banks, funds, microfinance institutions, to develop green products and also to decarbonize and increase resiliency of their portfolios, following the TCFD recommendations. Second, by mobilizing resources for the sustainable projects in the real economy. While public resources are focused on health emergency, we know there is interest by capital markets and by private investors to find climate assets. IDB Invest has developed product to develop those resources and to ensure that those resources have a positive impact in LAC. Third, and finally, developing a smart investment to boost resiliency against climate change. We are supporting the inclusion of resiliency in infrastructure design, increasing resiliency of value chains, and providing nature-based solutions to our clients. And with that, I will pass the word to James. Thank you.
Hi everybody, thanks for joining us. Thank you, Ilen, for that introduction. I wanted to just highlight one small change. From the Rockefeller Foundation, Maria Kozlowski, Senior Vice President from Innovative Finance, is joining us today. As Ilan highlighted, our triple strategy at the IDB Group, at IDB Invest, connects climate with sustainable finance. And that's the way we're working, and this is the theme of our discussion today. This is a hybrid event. We're connected from Washington, D.C., from Glasgow, and all around the world. As all of us know, the effects of the pandemic are long-lasting and have been devastated, in particular for Latin America and the Caribbean. So in the development space, we're in this business of what we call building back better, and that concept is a green and sustainable and inclusive recovery, where climate is an integral part. So, at the IDB Group, under the new administration of Mauricio Claver Carone, the president of the group, we came up with this concept of Vision 2025, where at the heart of it is the word nature and climate. And this is the reason why we're over here. We're joined by partners and friends, clients that are going to join us in this conversation. So let me start with Mafalda. Mafalda, as Ilan has said, heads the Climate Investment Fund. This has been critical partnership with us because they've worked together with us in Chile with a deal with NG. So if I can ask you directly a question, Mafalda, how do you think finance and investment can be mobilized at scale to help us move towards a transition to a low carbon future? And if you could tell me what collaborations is your institution doing at this effect?
Thank you, James, and it's my real pleasure to be here with you today in this really interesting and timely event, and with our great partner, Inter-American Development Bank. It's more critical than ever to act now and really mobilize the funding to developing countries. The big question that we all debate is how. How do we do this? And I would say by really bringing the comparative advantage and the capital of different institutions and financiers to bear. We ourselves at the Climate Investment Funds, with our partners, including the Inter-American Development Bank, have really demonstrated that over a number of years that public capital, which we know is scarce, but public capital at a reasonable scale, capital that is risk-bearing, concessional, patient capital, that is allocated to strategic priorities, and that is invested through institutions that know the markets, know the countries, have a track record, and these, of course, multilateral development banks, and being among the top of these. This combination of factors can really jumpstart markets where they don't exist. This type of approach can tackle risks of project developers and commercial lenders, and can also help the governments establish or enhance the policy and the regulatory and the institutional frameworks that are needed for these investments to reach a different scale and for private capital flows to increase significantly. The COVID-19 pandemic and this crisis, what it also has demonstrated is the capacity to mobilize unparalleled amount of capital to respond to a crisis. So the challenge that is posed to us right now is, let us do this to tackle the climate crisis. And so the question of what is needed, we need more of this risk-bearing, concessional, patient capital. And we need it to be used much more deliberately through the use of appropriate instruments, appropriate structures, relevant partnerships, deliberate objective to mobilize private capital. We ourselves are contributing to this. We are going to be launching new investment programs tomorrow here at the COP to drive the energy transition. And we are going to be doing this with a real focus on country, and at the country level, through country platforms, bring a broader range of financiers alongside. I think we have now reached a momentum, and from different angles, where we have institutional capital, different types of investors really interested in being exposed to emerging markets, to developing countries. We have the multilateral development banks really keen on supporting developing countries in these areas. We have the domestic financial markets as well, taking a keen interest. So we are in a different context than when we were, for example, 10, 12 years ago in the aftermath of the last crisis. And we need to take advantage of this momentum and at the country level, really bring all of these financiers to come together, and as I was saying earlier on, really bring their comparative advantage, their capital, to bear in helping the transitions that are necessary in a number of sectors.
Thank you, Mafalda. It's of great relevance, the news of the work that you're doing with de-risking, and I think the connection of de-risking with capital markets is a big one. I wanted to also introduce Laurie. Laurie heads FinDev Canada. It's an institution like the IDB Group, a bilateral institution that focuses on development across Latin America and Africa. I wanted to ask you the same question. How are you seeing this concept of mobilizing at scale, and what collaborations are you doing in the context of working towards a low carbon future?
Thanks so much. Well, so when I think about, what will it take to mobilize private capital at scale to support a low carbon transition, I really think of it across a number of different dimensions. The first aspect I think about is, who needs to be part of the conversation or who needs to be part of the action. And I think it's an all of the above approach. It will take governments, it'll take developed country governments, developing country governments, public capital. It'll take multilateral development banks like IDB Invest. It will take bilateral development finance institutions. And of course, it'll take private capital of all sorts. So that's the who. We already know what the what. The what is for transition to a low carbon future. And then the how do we get there? And I really look at it sort of across 4 building blocks, let's say. And it's really an ecosystem approach that we need to take. First is that we need to engage with governments, and governments need to have a plan. And there's lots of great examples of governments that do have plans. We need solid regulatory, institutional policy frameworks. So there's a lot that the governments need to do to create that environment. Secondly is, we need the proverbial pipelines of bankable projects. So the governments also need to take great action on actually providing investment opportunities. Third, to draw in the private sector, we need to have project level investments that really make sense and are going to speak to the risk return appetite of the private sector. And then more than a project by project or a transaction by transaction approach, we need to figure out ways to build platforms and programs that are really going to bring in the big capital, the transformative capital. So that's a little bit how I look at it in terms of these building blocks and really an ecosystem approach, and it's all of the above. It's going to take everyone for the reasons that we know. Now, some of the collaborations that FinDev Canada is involved with, are with our multilateral partners and with our development finance partners, and I'll just mention a couple. One is around the Adaptation and Resilience Investment collaboration, and that is a group of DFIs and now other members that have come together to really take a look at the adaptation and resilience agenda. There's a number of different working groups around metrics, around investment vehicles, and around sort of the taxonomy and definition of what adaptation and resilience is. So that's one example of how we're working in a collaborative space. Since there's so much going on in the mitigation space, this is something that we're doing in the adaptation space. So just wanted to mention that. Of course, there's another one that maybe we'll talk about a little bit later on around gender, the 2X collaborative as well, but maybe I'll pick that up in a moment.
Thanks, and I think I like this concept of all hands on deck, in particular that this is no longer an effort only on multilaterals or bilateral institutions, but also a larger community. And with that, Maria, you had this innovative space in Rockefeller Foundation. So tell me more about how you look at scaling up your activities over here in the collaboration.
So the Rockefeller Foundation, the way we look at it is we have some of the most maybe valuable capital in that it's the grant capital that can perhaps unlock the private sector capital and to an extent facilitate even larger dollar flows going in from the development financed institutions. About a year ago, we were still early on in the pandemic, and the foundation took a decision it had never done in the history of the foundation. We went to the capital markets and we issued a bond. And what that has enabled us to do is bring forward some of our spend. And with that spend, we said we raised capital, and that with our typical annual spend, we've committed $1 billion to come and facilitate this come back better, what have you, post-pandemic. And a theme that we really have gone deep on is on climate. And we've gone deep on it. We announced actually at COP this year, we've put together a global alliance. It's called the Global Energy Alliance for People and Poverty, and People and Planet to address energy poverty. And we put a lot of our capital behind that. There's $2 billion of philanthropic capital that then is going to combine with the multilaterals to specifically focus on how do we move some of this investment forward faster, and how do we go deeper, and how do we get more transactions. And I think this concept of bringing blended finance, having more people at the table, we have been talking about this for a while, but I do think the pandemic, what we're seeing in weather issues one after another, it really has concentrated people's attention on it. It facilitated, frankly, us putting this alliance together and getting this much philanthropic capital together. It's enabling us to take our philanthropic capital, partner it with development capital, and say, we really need to go deep. And at the base of it is this concept of, I guess, innovative financing. What are the different pools of capital that each of the players brings? We're not all the same. We each have different requirements. But you do feel a tone now that's a little bit different, that we can finally sort of take some of these, what I would say have been maybe a little bit more academic, and get it into execution. So that's what we've been excited about COP, because it's been some work to get here. But I do feel that coming out of COP, there's maybe more execution potential than there's been in the past.
Thanks, Maria. And I would say that all our work is for institutions like PIMCO to invest in this space. As Maria was talking about de-risking, we're talking about de-risking. And I know that PIMCO has taken a big leadership role in ESG investments, in particular related to climate. So tell us more about what you're doing at PIMCO and how does it relate to this topic?
Yeah, I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about that. But that's part of our belief, is that we can offer great opportunities for our investors, and increasingly they want to be aligned with sustainability, and climate is the number one focus. There's plenty of capital out there, so the question is, how do we find ways to partner with development banks and others to do something different this time, something a little bit more innovative. And that's why we participate in events like this, and that's why partners like IDB are very important, that are leading the charge on trying to mobilize private sector capital and thinking in different ways to get that done. So I would say, just to give you some idea of the momentum that's changing, which we really do agree with that there's a different feeling from our institutional clients and what they're trying to achieve. So for example, we have roughly 650 billion of the 2.2 trillion that we manage on behalf of clients globally has some element of sustainability incorporated in the guidelines and what we're trying to achieve for them. Okay, and that just keeps growing. So at some point maybe it'll be the majority of assets, I would say. But that's just one that just gives you some sort of idea about the direction of travel and the willingness to think about new ways to invest, to have be aligned with sustainability, to have impact. As I said, climate's the number one focus. So, whether it's we've worked with other partners, for instance, to basically develop the sustainability-linked bond market, right? Which now you see growing very, very large. And this year, when you count those combined with the green bond market, which most people realize, and it's about $1 trillion of issuance globally this year is what it's estimated to be. So the market basically doubled in 18 months, right? So that's why when we sit back and say, well, that whole market probably will become a $10 to $20 trillion marketplace. So that's really that's a mainstream element that most clients can approach that sector of the bond market. It's kind of a new innovation. But there'll be plenty others. And of course, we've been talking to our development bank partners about how we can invest in smaller ways, more oriented towards impact, right? That's a big focus of ours. And so, that requires us to think about new ways of packaging those together and new collaborations to make that happen. Big desire from our institutional clients to access that space, right? Because they can't do it, individually, line item by line item, with such a large group of development institutions. But there's ways to think about, collaborating with one another and pulling together to make innovations like that happen. So that's definitely the direction of travel, and we really appreciate the partnership that we have with IDB.
It's a real pleasure, Scott, and thank you. Now, I want to tie this conversation that we're having with what does the future look like for institutions like us in the development space. As all of you know very well, development institutions around the world have been primary investors in impact. But now, over the last many years, the emergence of institutions like PIMCO and the Rockefeller Foundations investing and looking at this as a new asset class. And that makes us beg the question about what is our role as a development institution. And we see the emergence of our role being a de-risking, an enabler, rather than just an investor. In the past, we just invested. And now what we're targeting is looking at what do these trillions of dollars that are looking for investments, why aren't they investing into the space? And probably there's a concept of understanding the space, qualifying the space, rating the space, but also de-risking the space. For the most part, emerging markets are lower than investment grade, and when you look at the international investors, the threshold of investment grade is important. So us finding ways of de-risking that is a concept that we've done together in a number of times, and it actually can be a good complement. In that context, I'd like to refer to Mafalda again, because that was a good example of what we did together in Chile. Tell us what you see as the most promising approach to financing climate change, particularly when it comes to the global economic recovery that we're seeing in the region.
Well, thank you, James. Let me start by saying that, and we all will agree in the panel here, that there is a very strong alignment between climate action and the COVID-19 global economic recovery. And our investments, the Climate Investment Fund's investments with our partners, including IDB, are a real proof of that. In our energy sector portfolio, we are supporting 6 million jobs, and also contributing to an additional $46 billion in direct and indirect economic value added. This is on top of the level of total investments made at the project level. But we are also contributing to broadening energy access for 10 million people, and we know how important energy access is in terms of livelihoods and local economic development. Now, coming back to the question of what do I see as most promising approaches to financing climate action, I'm going to touch on both downstream and upstream. What does it mean at the project level? What are we seeing, and what are we seeing in particular in the LAC region that is quite promising? And then what we are doing in terms of tapping into the institutional capital and international capital markets. In terms of the downstream area, I'm going to give a few examples. One is really providing financing and technical assistance to national development banks and local financial institutions. We ourselves have a portfolio of around $1 billion invested through these institutions. And we see the results, and we see great potential to scale that up. These are the institutions that know the local economies, make the best credit assessments of the local entrepreneurs, local private sector entities. And so really there's a large potential to do more there. Another example that I would like to give are financing facilities, such as the one that IDB Invest has set up in Honduras. And it's innovative because it is addressing the lack of risk equity available to small-scale project developers. And by doing so, it really is enabling these developers to access the local debt market and cultivate this local investment chain. I think it is a great example that we are actually showcasing as well in the recent report we launched this week with BNEF, and I think it has the potential to be replicated in other countries. Other examples, and I'm going to mention them very briefly, in Chile, an innovative financial model to help phase out coal. So by putting a monetary value on the avoided GHG emissions, this model is encouraging ENGIE Energia to phase out from coal and put up equivalent install capacity of renewable energy. And the other example that I would give is one we are also involved with IDB, and that is supporting domestic bond markets in Mexico. So we have come in and provided a second loss guarantee to really credit enhance this first small scale green asset aggregation platform, which then issues bonds in the local capital markets to support small-scale renewable energy and energy efficiency projects that are developed by the energy service companies.
Thank you very much. And the 6 million jobs number that you refer to that your portfolio is creating is a good example of how you link climate investments with job creation and recovery in a sustainable way. Scott, over to you. Tell me, you talked that we are moving away from just what we need to do to how we need to do it. And give me a few examples, some of those increasing innovative financial models that you're looking at. I know that you did fundraising in this experience, but you did see that you need to innovate and take more risk. Give me that example if you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons we've been very focused on getting many of our clients and actually big corporations around the world to come together and solve some of those problems and to think about the innovation that needs to happen, right, for their own investments, also for their own companies. So we have the pleasure of co-chairing the UN CFO task force for the SDGs, right? And of the work streams that we have going on, one of them is how companies can invest for themselves, but offer opportunities to investors also to align with sustainability, and how they think about that and the whole balance sheet and capital structure that they're accessing the markets with. Also how they can communicate with one another and learn from one another through that network. So the UN recently announced plans to grow that to hundreds of global corporates to really solve some of these problems, but also get the critical mass that you need to really get that type of investment going and get these market innovations going, things like sustainability-linked bonds. You need that, right? So it's really partnership and collaboration that's a huge element to what we see working well. Another thing, we're part of a network called Global Investors for Sustainable Development, which is another UN initiative. Lots of work streams there to think about, innovative new fund structures, new ways of pooling investments together for impact, and giving access to investors that would have always wanted to invest in that space, but just haven't been able to find the tool or the vehicle to do it. So, that's just some of the examples. And for us, it's a belief that, SDG number 17 is a really important one. And if we can build these networks and think creatively, like you mentioned, the Rockefeller Foundation, the bond, that was a creative, innovation. But was very well received by investors, right? So there's all types of things like that can be done by working together. So just want to mention a few.
Thanks, Scott. Maria, how do you see the challenge for a green recovery?
Well, I think the challenge is countries have a lot on their plates. And so even though there's a lot of immediate needs, and the immediate needs, that's what populations want, immediate needs taken care of. The green recovery is a long-term play, but if we don't get started now, you could argue we're already way behind. We should have started this decades ago, but we are where we are, and I think for us it's can we play a role, especially in developing countries that they have a lot on their plates. Can we come in with some of our philanthropic capital in the ecosystem side where we can, support bringing in some, skills support or other type of support just to help on the government side get them as they're tackling these. And then fundamentally for us, we're trying to drive our capital to create more projects, more investments, and ultimately the key with that is jobs, right? So I think trying to take them on that trajectory, but I would say it's a balance, and it's trying to get some of that spending done now up front, because we actually don't have the luxury of time.
James, if I might just to add on to that point, I think one of the things that we've been advocating would be really helpful if countries would come up with these investment roadmaps to connect investors with the opportunities. Right? It's very difficult for companies, investors individually to learn about some of the opportunities and to see them. So there's different things we've been working on, creating a hub for information exchange where governments and agencies could post opportunities, and investors like ourselves can see them and then start working on bilaterally on that basis. But we feel that that's really important. There should be a much better cooperation, and governments need to see examples, and they need to know the power of it and see how it works. So that's on us and other investors to try to make that happen. But that is really would be very powerful.
Great. And Laurie, so you lead a relatively new development institution, but also with a large ambition that is the Canadian government's view on how green recovery will take form. Tell me a bit about your experience joining that institution, and in particular your new vision of the institution.
Great. Well, I wanted to maybe pick up that question following on a comment that Scott as well as Maria had made around what is recovery and the focus on sustainability. And I think a really important aspect that FinDev Canada is putting at the fore, and it's really been ingrained in the institution since the beginning, and certainly something that we're continuing out there, is while there's focus on sustainability writ large and climate, gender equality is also a key part of what recovery will look like going forward, and it's a key part of FinDev Canada's DNA, as I said. So we're looking at women's economic empowerment and gender equality in all of the investments. So we consider ourselves a gender lens investor. We bring that not just to the work that we do with intermediation, but also in our direct investments. So that's something that we're looking at as we're doing more and more in the climate space and in looking forward into the infrastructure space. It's not, is it gender, or is it sustainability, or is it climate? It's kind of all of the above. They're inextricably linked. And so that's a voice that we want to be very strong in, and we'll continue to be strong in, that we bring that inclusivity lens, because there is no sort of sustainable recovery without inclusivity.
Well, thank you very much to all of you. And I'd like to finish with some concluding remarks. This is COP26, the 26th anniversary of COP, and I wanted to reflect on three things that came up in this conversation. One, your statement, Maria, about the urgency. I remember I was in a previous panel of Standard & Poor's, and the head of sustainability of Access said, nature does not wait. And that's reality, and we should have started decades ago when Al Gore and many others were telling us the importance of this, but the urgency is more than imminent. The second one is, I participated a few months ago with a special envoy for the climate, Secretary Kerry, and he mentioned this concept of innovation. And I'm seeing a lot of that in this conversation. I'm seeing a lot of that in these meetings, is that the solutions are not that simple and requires a lot of innovation that traditionally is not the space in which multilaterals or commercial banks operate. So bringing in institutions like the foundation, or bringing in new institutional investors that tell us what do they require, is a big effort. And I think we've got great examples of nascent innovations in this space that actually can be scaled up. And the third concept is the role of the private sector. We've always said the role of sustainable development is the role of governments. And we know that governments are really focused, as many of you said, on the urgency, health, education, the urgent needs. and sometimes it's leaving space either because they don't have the bandwidth or because they don't have the capital to leave space for what a sustainable recovery could be. And there's the strong emergence of the private sector playing a bigger role over there because of the job creation, because they affect more the planet more than any others. And I think the combination of the urgency with innovation and the role of the private sector seems to be the solution that we're all looking for. So thank you very much. Always a real pleasure connecting with all of you, and thank you very much for joining us.